And a good school is determined by how much income, how much tax that school is able to collect. And so I then find myself in this position where my aspirations are pitted directly against another set of aspirations. So I have my desire for a multiracial society, and I have the desire for my child to have a strong education. And I have to make choices about that. So then say I make the decision to buy a house in a good neighborhood so my child has a good education. Chances are that neighborhood is less racially diverse. And then that means that my child will not have the same kinds of intraracial experiences growing up that I had living in a city where when my parents had fewer choices that were related to my father's immigration status, or not status, but the fact that he was an immigrant, and that it was harder for him to find good work, which limited where we could live. And so that's where I see the structural racism starts coming into play, is that I can personally have one set of aspirations. I may value racial diversity, but given that wealth and access to schooling is so closely linked to home ownership in this society, I don't have to be racist in the traditional sense of the word of not liking somebody who's not like myself to actually be carrying on that tradition.
There was no place for us in school. I would argue that the greatest waste of time in my life was the 4 years I spent in high school. And this is coming from an educator. That there was, from the food we were fed to the only way we were really accepted in school, the black boys are the mascots of any high school that they're in where I grew up. I don't know about other places. I've seen it in other places, though. I see it now at universities. Well, like the black dudes are, they're the provocative part of your experience in high school or college or in the workplace, And for me, it didn't speak to me.
White boy who walks in the room and is animated and moving around and maybe even a little cheeky is smart. And isn't he smart? Isn't he cheeky? He's almost looked at as, well, boys will be boys. A boy of color, especially an African-American boy who walks in the room exhibiting the same behavior, walks in and it's, I might need to keep an eye on him. And that, I really believe, is our internalized racism, that we are afraid of these young boys. And I'm talking young boys, 4 years old and above. And that instead of the teacher looking at him or herself and saying, what is going on with me? That this same behavior creates fear in me instead of admiration. We pathologize the boy of color.
Race always deals with boxes, right? And I think when we are, so let's say you grow up in the suburbs, or you grow up in an affluent area in a city that has an affluent area and a ghetto, but you're black, a black boy. And so you get to school and there's a box for you. And that box says you rap, you're an athlete, you're slightly to highly misbehaved. You're not involved or into your education that much. You sell and or use drugs. That's the box that you're accepted in. And in order to play ball, no pun intended, that's how you interact with yourself, your own identity, and this is how you're cool. But you feel like the box that it traps you in is you feel like to be healthier, to be in a more sound mind state, to think and know and come from a place of foundation in your life is something that you have to be ashamed of and you have to denounce, can drive you crazy.
So my sophomore year, I took a trip to Appalachia with just a religious kind of service group, and we were set up with little home repair projects in this very small, rural, low-income community in eastern Kentucky. And some of the houses didn't have running water, some of them didn't have electricity, and they were down these rutted roads and in an area I just never knew existed, and conditions I didn't know existed in our country. And at the same time, there were these huge coal corporations just raking in huge money in the same communities. And it just made me look at what was wrong with this picture and what did I want to do about it. And I ended up wanting to take more people to Appalachia and take people to the Deep South and just give them a just immersion experience in poverty and give them an immersion experience in racism.
More and more we came to this understanding that the problems that our society was facing were systemic, that they were not the problem of individuals. So we had started down this path of trying to understand systems. And in the course of that, I met John Powell, who is very passionate about race as well. And so he started talking about his perspective about how he saw race playing into all of this. And of course, when he started talking about race and how it operated in our society, it immediately started resonating with me because it started explaining all of these personal experiences, these individual experiences that I had had in a way that I could see that they fit into this much larger system. That it wasn't just my father being an immigrant, or it wasn't just my father being dark-skinned. But this was something that this experience he had had, my father had had, was an experience that he shared with many people who found themselves being described in similar ways.
You know, right now where we are in the world, we really need to work together. And so we have all kinds of folks trying to work together, trying to work against this battle or win that battle or build this community and break down and dismantle, you know, communities that aren't serving us. But what gets in the way every time is race.
There's unconscious bias that's built into our brains because we have really, as human beings for hundreds and thousands of years, absorbed messages about who belongs at the top of the racial hierarchy and who belongs at the bottom.
I was born in Medford, Oregon, and in Medford there were absolutely no people of color within the city limits. So we're 11 years old and I meet another person who then becomes my best friend, and she still is my best friend. And her name was Serena Maria Cruz, right? So Serena, for me, wasn't of color. She was white. So we're graduating, we're signing up for the PSAT to take the test, and this is where we've gone to school together for 5 or 6 years, and we've been to each other's houses, we've had birthday parties, we're all involved in the same gifted program activities, and she's filling out her form and filling out her race. And I'm filling out my form, and I look over at Serena, and I see her filling out the bubble for Hispanic. And so I actually reach out, and I grab her hand, and I pull it up, and I tell her, Serena, you're supposed to fill out the white bubble. And she looks at me, and she says, look at me, Susie. She says, look at me, like this. And I looked at her, and I didn't have any clue what she was talking about. I didn't know what she was talking about. And when I look back now, right, and I think about entitlement, I mean, it's hard for me to even locate where racial entitlement is because everything about my life has been entitlement.
When I use the term codes of power, I'm foremost talking about the reality that culture informs everything that we do. And that most white people, because we live in a country where we see ourselves everywhere in every way, and our culture is validated everywhere and in every way, we don't understand how our cultural values are brought into the classroom. So when a white boy walks in the room, we understand him. We have similar cultural values. We understand how to behave, how to talk, how to respond to one another. If I'm a white woman and he's a white boy, he can see me as his mother. I can see him as my child. That positions him to know not only that he's right in the world, but that he deserves to feel comfortable and that he is really claiming his rightful place in the world to be a leader. White boy who walks in the room and is animated and moving around and maybe even a little cheeky is smart. And isn't he smart? Isn't he cheeky? He's almost looked at as, well, boys will be boys. A boy of color, especially an African American boy who walks in the room exhibiting the same behavior, walks in and says, I might need to keep an eye on him. And that, I really believe, is our internalized racism, that we are afraid of these young boys. And I'm talking young boys, 4 years old and above. And that instead of the teacher looking at him or herself and saying, what is going on with me, that this same behavior creates fear in me instead of admiration, we pathologize the boy of color.
I travel all the time. If I'm in an airport, I've seen folks particularly who could be perceived as being from the so-called Middle East, who could be perceived as potentially Arab or whatnot, or Persian or anything else. How many times I've seen them pulled aside and searched, and it's not that fascinates me so much. It's the reaction of the other travelers that I'm looking for, right? It's the reaction of folks looking at them sort of very nervously, as opposed to when I'm stopped, because I travel enough, occasionally I'm going to get searched. Statistically, that's obviously going to happen. And when I am, what's that experience like? And I pay very close attention, and no one's looking at me. No one is looking at me with that look of, oh, crap, I really hope that white dude is not on my plane, right? Nobody's really nervous about that.
When I think of internalized racism, I think of the appropriation by persons of color of the prejudice, bigotry, and stereotypes which are aimed at them.
It's always kind of like climbing up this mountain. Well, maybe if I do this, maybe if I do that. And sometimes not even consciously saying, well, maybe if I do this. It's not like I would consciously say, well, maybe if I just made my hair a little straighter, I would be more accepted.
You start learning, oh, well, if I could be more white, then I could be more comfortable, then I can fit in better. There would be people that would come into the flower shop where my mom worked. I would work in there sometimes during high school. And if there was someone that walked in that was, say, Latino, I might help them last, just like the white people do.
I think it's really, as Americans, we still are really not good at seeing a racist impact when there is no apparent racist. We need to really broaden our view so that we can see that if you have had decades, centuries of explicit racism, and then on top of that, you lay seemingly race-neutral rules and policies, you're going to get still a churning out of racial disparities, again, even if no one intended to do that. Because that's the way structural racism works, that history matters.
I grew up in Washington, D.C., later named Chocolate City. And the experience of growing up in Washington, D.C., in Southeast Washington, which is right on the Maryland, D.C. border, with poor white people on the Maryland border and working black folks on the D.C. side, was pretty crucial in laying the foundation for my understanding of humanity, not just of race. As a child, as most children are, I was really inquisitive. And so I knew that when I went to Northwest Washington, D.C., where the Capitol, the Monument, and the White House were located, that there was a different quality of life for the people who matriculated that area. And then right down the street almost